See, I did it again. There we go. That's right. Okay. So I will just put this way, and I might touch it every once in a while to make sure it's still on.
Yeah, sure.
All right. So I'll begin with the introduction. As a research participant, you will be asked to answer a series of open-ended questions about the role and/or your experiences with personal awareness within counselor education. The interview will be recorded, conducted face-to-face, and the expected duration will be approximately 1 hour at the longest. Every effort to maintain privacy and confidentiality of research participants will be utilized, and no identifying information, e.g. names, ages, or university affiliations about participants will be disclosed. Furthermore, we will not disclose information about research participants and or their involvement in the study to others outside the research team. Your decision to be involved in the study is entirely voluntary, and you may choose to decline participation at any time without penalty. Furthermore, you will not be punished if you decide to not participate and or stop taking part in the study. Therefore, you may choose to stop taking part in the study after today. If you choose not to partake in the study, we will not collect any more data from you, but we will keep and use the information we had already collected from you. Okay.
Sounds good.
All right, so here's the first question. No, it's okay. What value do you place on increasing students' personal awareness in counselor education and or supervision?
I feel like for me, that's probably the primary thing that I focus on. I feel like that's one of those things that if you don't have it, there's really a limit to how much you can grow in. So that, and just personally, that tends to be where I tend to gravitate towards in education, supervision. The question is always, what does this mean about you? What does this mean for you as a human being?
So it's really important for you and your work with students. What kinds of assignments do you give students to facilitate their personal awareness as a counselor educator?
One that I use a lot throughout all my classes are the reflection papers. Mm-hmm. So, what did you learn about this? And that's the question I ask when almost any assignment is given. Okay, what did you learn about this? So there's that theme of self-reflection. The other thing that I think is really important is I like to have assignments where they have experience on being on the opposite ends of things. Okay. So an internship, it's, okay, we're going to do an expressive arts activity and you have to be on the receiving end to see what it feels like. Mm-hmm. For my appraisal class, it's you have to be assessed as part of a group project. That way you know what it feels like to have to fill out all these really probing assessments. For when I teach basic skills, it's part of being a client, I think, is a really important experience. And so I think those are all really important. I also think I like to circle back to who are we as professionals and bring out that professional identity piece to look at, am I aware of who I am and how I'm coming across as an individual?
So a lot of like putting the student in sort of the actual role and experience it for themselves.
Yes, absolutely. Because I think when you get separated from that, or when you get distance from what it's like to be on the other side, your empathy starts to degrade a little bit. And it's like, okay, well, this is just another appointment, as opposed to, I remember what it's like to be on the other end of things, and I know what it's like to be uncertain about things. So
personal experiences are important.
Yes.
This one is similar to the last question. Describe the experiential activities that you use to facilitate personal awareness in the classroom.
Okay. Since I teach testing and measurement, so we are always taking tests, personal tests. So,
very cool.
So I do Myers-Briggs stuff. So I have I just went through the certification training last Christmas. It was really good. I was surprised. So, I'll have experiments where I'll split them up. So I'll say, okay, here are all of our introverts over here. Here are all of our extroverts over here. And I'll give them a task, and then I'll help them reflect on, are you aware of how you did that task differently than this group, and then I'll facilitate dialogue between the two. Like, what do you wish you could ask them? The group of extroverts. What do you wish you could ask the introverts? So,
like even dialogue between the polarities of personality.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And so they're sort of like, oh, because you have some extroverts who have introvert clients, and they wouldn't really get that, and so I think that's a big part, that experiential part. I also try to. I have my little coffee mug. I put feelings in it for my pre-prac class. I'm like, okay, you have to be this feeling now whenever you're with your counselor in practice, and so they get that experience of what's it like to be with someone who's pissed, what's it like to be with someone who's really nervous, and so developing the awareness of how we react to other people, I think is really important.
So it seems like again more hands-on, taking on what it's like experientially to be a certain feeling, and that is an internal process, and even allows the other student the ability to work with that.
Yeah. Another activity that I sometimes do is I will have them say, okay, what's your worst fear? Because in pre-practice, a lot of times you get the, what if my client does this? What if my client does this? And so I say, okay, let's do it. I say, I can't tell you so much as I can show you. Yes. So I have someone role play that. We do it in front of class. And I say, okay, what did you experience as I was dealing with that as the client? What did you all notice? And then I have them do the same. I have them, okay, you saw what I did. Now, see one, do one, teach one, Yes. So those are some of the things I think tend to be helpful in my classes I've done.
That sounds really interesting. Okay. How would you describe your use of counseling skills to facilitate personal awareness with students?
I think that's an interesting one because there's always this fine line that we walk. And so in clinical classes, it's a little bit different. But one thing I've found in my internship class this semester is using group process a lot is really important. And so I use mindfulness, not every week, but more weeks than not. We start off with a mindfulness activity to sort of help them transition into the right space. Because I think sometimes their jobs, and it may be their internship or it may be they're coming from, working at JCPenney, they're not always being completely present and aware of what the process is. And so I like to help them transition from the outside world to internship class.
So facilitating some groundedness allows them to be present.
Yeah, and so doing some check-ins, so typical sort of group stuff. And then I also like to have them talk with each other. So, I'll, instead of me saying like, okay, here's what you need to do with this client. I mean, I'll do that sometimes, but a lot of times it's about, okay, what are you all seeing? And it helps give them a different perspective because their friend sees this, the other friend sees this. And so we've got, 12 different perspectives in the room. It helps them become more aware of, oh, I'm only seeing this one piece.
And it allows you to bring all of them into the room with their experiences and reflect on their own, but also hear others.
Absolutely. I've also, the feedback I've gotten is it also feels safer when we continue to have those conversations. Because if I just sat there and talked, then they'd be like, well, I don't know who this person is. I'm not sure I really want feedback from them. But to have that sort of group experience is really important. So that's how I tend to do it with clinical classes. I also like to have, individual experiences with students as well as the group experiences. So using my counseling skills, sometimes I can parse out that person is not ready for that feedback in this setting. And so sometimes I'll look at other settings. So just in the same way, I might say to someone that's in group, it sounds like you might also need individual that's what I've done with some internship students. I've
Mm.
said, okay, it seems like you're struggling, and it would derail class for us to go into all of what you need, so we can meet individually. And so I've seen that, sort of those different levels of care being really important.
So there's been an awareness of you, again, among your students of their different needs.
Absolutely. I find, and this is more when I've done supervision for as like a site supervisor, but sometimes you have a group of students or even a dyad of students who they just are not on the same level. And so sometimes you have to split them up because it's hard to bounce back and forth between, like, here's someone that's really looking at theoretical conceptualization, and here's someone that basic skills are still a real struggle
real
for.
Dichotomy there. And you mentioned at the outset of this question that sometimes there is a fine line.
Yeah.
So could you say more about that?
Yeah. One thing, and it depends on the student as to how open they are, but I'll get into, it seems like there's some personal issues going on here. And I view my job as I'm there to bring it up. I'm not necessarily there to resolve it, but help them figure out what's my next step in resolving that. But I'll frequently check in and say, I know I'm not your counselor, so did that feel like it went too far? Or how are you doing with all this? Because I've certainly had students that had personalization issues come up, and we sort of had to deal with, okay, I'm not saying we have to deal with that here, but where you want to put that.
So you facilitate their awareness of
Yes.
that personal issue that might get in the way of their work.
Absolutely. A common one is students who are doing couples counseling, and then maybe they're a child of divorce, so they have all these feelings about divorce and feeling like, oh, I have to make sure this marriage stays together. And I'll bring up, okay, the teaching piece, that's not actually your job. Sometimes the best resolution is for the couple to break up. But there's also something about you that feels like a high stakes decision. So it seems like I'm wondering where that comes from. I wonder if that's coming from a personal place.
I see. So there's an awareness in you as you work with these students of what triggers them and what they may consider doing with that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the more you know your students, the easier that is to see. And students that are a little more, I find that there are students who want that experience, and then there are students who they just want to be done. So the students the students that want the experience, it's a little easier to tap into that. The students who are task oriented, I'll put that a little more positive terms. It's a little harder to tap into that for them. Or I might step up to the precipice, but we can't quite get there. So that tends to be my experience with more clinical classes. But I even think with didactic classes, there's a place for that. A place for, providing, just providing information about, okay, this is how I try to model and say, this is my personal awareness. I'll share times when I was a particular way, or I noticed, I noticed my Myers-Briggs type coming out, or I noticed, one thing I talk to students a lot about is feeling like you're omniscient is sort of, it almost always leads to you being a pessimist.
Yes.
And so I share examples where I sort of went off the deep end with that feeling like you know everything and then realizing you don't. So I think modeling that you're in process is a really important piece, which sort of comes in with that. To be a counselor, you have to be a human being first.
Right. So it's almost as if by doing that, you give them permission to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's see here. What obstacles have you experienced when facilitating students' personal awareness?
I think one that I've experienced is sometimes it feels like we're in driver's ed, and they've got that magical brake pedal, and so I'll see students who are like, no, I will not go any farther than this. And I think it feels like students are changing as time goes on, and their expectations of the process and how invested they're going to be in the process has changed in recent time. That sometimes they sort of feel like I'll bring this up because I used to work at for-profit university, and so we had a lot of people who were, I like my job, I need a master's degree to get a promotion, so that's why I'm here. And so that motivation sort of changed things. So like, I'm not here to have a transformative personal experience. I'm here because I need a master's degree. And so I found it's somewhat difficult if your investment is only a financial one.
Right. It seems like their intentions are different. You mentioned that, I guess, even in your experience, that I guess the intentionality of students may have changed in terms of what they're expecting to have.
And I don't want to paint this broad stroke that all students are, but I'll have groups that are really easy to work with because they come in and they have a spirit of curiosity. And I have other students that have come in and it's like they've put plaster of Paris coating over their worldview, and this is how the world is. I already know that. Just give me the laundry list of things I need to do to be a counselor. And so, I feel like, especially working with kids, that part of my job isn't just teaching skills, but it's about helping instill a new philosophy. And if they're not quite on board with that, that's a real obstacle.
What methods do you facilitate when working with students' resistance to examining personal notes?
That is a good question. I'm going to take a second to collect my thoughts on that.
Yeah.
I think one thing I like to do is I like to do a check-in and say, where are we at? How are we doing in this class? I think looking at what the student's perception is really important. I also think sometimes I've had students where things were not going well. Either it was because they were resistant or because they were lacking some personal awareness. And so what I tell my counselors and what I try to do as a professor is, if I see something that's an issue, you have to name it and call it out. So I think talking about the elephant in the room is probably the most powerful intervention.
So confronting it.
Yeah, absolutely. But still in a way that confrontation feels, it has all that connotation.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think, I sort of think of from narrative therapy, we have the idea if we can give a name to the problem, then it becomes somewhat more confrontable, or we can deal with it, as opposed to if it's just this ethereal, unnamed problem. So I think simply that can be really powerful.
By naming it, it personalizes it for the person.
Absolutely. And once you name it, it's something that other people have gone through too, as opposed to there's just this feeling coming up.
What kinds of things may prevent you from facilitating students' personal awareness, e.g., personal fears you may have?
I tend to find that I think this is true for counseling as well as being a professor. If I don't feel comfortable, I can't facilitate a feeling of comfort and safety in the class. And so I know for me personally, I have sort of an odd blend. If you look at the Adlerian personality priorities, it's a blend of superiority and pleasing, which aren't two that you normally see together. But for me, if I can't feel like I've connected or if I've landed a point with students, that makes it a little more difficult. So I tend to find if a class is all introverted, or really hard to read for some reason. Maybe they're a little closed off. That makes it difficult for me, and I might get exhausted trying to connect with them.
To reach out to them.
Yes. I also feel like another thing that's difficult is when a class starts on a bad foot. It's harder to pull it out of a tailspin, especially if some sort of culture, or say there are students that have a true conflict, not just like we don't like each other, but we have a history of not liking each other. That can really derail a class, and it's hard to make a safe place when two people are never going to feel safe with each other. So those tend to be things that, for me, make it difficult for me to do my job.
So sort of pre-existing conditions, lack of connectivity, and even introversion.
I think it's a lot like a group that you don't get to select or screen people out for. Some groups just aren't going to gel, and some are going to gel really easy. So, and I think you can try work with that, but you also have to manage your expectations for a group of people that maybe didn't necessarily ask to be together.
How do you set professional boundaries with your students? For example, dual relationships and separating between being a therapist and a counselor educator.
One that I have done is, while I'm really laid back in class, it's always Dr. Holloman. Because Ryan might be your friend and not fail you. Dr. Holloman is not. Dr. Holloman's friendly, but he's not your friend. That can be true after you graduate, but I think it's important to set those sorts of boundaries up front. I think also, I love Carl Rogers, but I think having a grade behind things sort of sets professional expectations of, I have expectations for you and evaluations. I also think it's important that students see from the out front that you're committed to their success. I think that shares something, because I think some students can feel like, well, you're just here. You're just earning a paycheck. And so I think, again, modeling that I'm going to work really hard, therefore you should work really hard is important. I also think self-care is important as a professor. The university I used to work at, we were open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because it was online. And so I'd be getting emails from people from different countries, different time zones, and I had to learn, you know what? No one's benefiting from me answering this email at this time of night. And so I also think it's easy, especially for if you are a little more laid back, having things written down very exactly. And so I've had to work a lot at, okay, here's how my syllabus looks, and here are all the expectations. And here are the assignments in the exact descriptions. I think the other just common truth is, when it comes to professionalism, it's easier to be very stern on the first day of class and lighten up, as opposed to the other way around.
Right. So setting that at the outset is important, albeit through how you model in class, but also with your syllabus and what expectations are.
Absolutely. I think the other thing that I tend to bring is, I'll tell students this, especially in my appraisal class, because it's a little challenging to say, I expect when you walk in this room, you are as smart as I am, and you get everything I say unless you ask a question. And so it's your responsibility to let me know you haven't got something. It's not my responsibility to see that you're completely lost. I don't know unless you speak up. And so I think that sort of helps them understand that they have an investment in this process, and as a professional, if they don't get something, they shouldn't just nod and smile.
So empowering them by returning responsibility.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is important. Let's see. So have you ever had any issues, or how do you combat perhaps in the classroom between being in a therapist role as a counselor educator? Is there any issue that you've had in class that comes up for you?
I think what's immediately coming to my mind is as I've grown as a therapist, and the whole time I've been a counselor educator, I've continued to see clients on the side. So I think that helps a lot. But as I've continued, I feel a little more sure of myself. And so a student might, I could have that very warm counselor presence, and a student was like, well, what if we didn't have this paper? And so I'll just laugh and be like, really like that to happen, I'm sure. But knowing that I have the ultimate power, I sort of have that break too, I think has helped some of those boundary problems. I also think having colleagues I can go to and talk to about issues and how to deal with them has been really helpful. I've had students that I've struggled with, and I have colleagues I'll trust. Here that they have them in class, I'm like, this is what I'm experiencing. Is it just me, or is this more of a global issue for this student? So, just like being a counselor, I think, and there's having people you can go to and say, like, is this me not stepping out of my counselor role enough, or is it is this something else? And that, I think, again, I talked about this before, but I think returning responsibility is a really easy way. So I've had students come to me who have had crises, and certainly I'm more empathic, but at the end it's, okay, what do you want? How can I help you? Tell me how to help you. And this is what I'm willing to do, this is what I'm not willing to do. So I find that to be, sort of helps me move between those two roles. Also, just from a class perspective, there's always this idea of a class has to have momentum. You're going somewhere. And so while we may hang out in that counseling place, ultimately we have a destination, which is not exactly the same way I do therapy. And so that sort of helps me step back and say, okay, that was nice that we had a chance to do that. Now, back to the projector and the PowerPoints.
So the destination is back to the class experience, and albeit if they come to you individually, the destination is, I guess you send them somewhere else if they come to you with an issue, a personal issue.
Yes, but it's all in service of, I want to help you become a clinician, and there is an ultimate destination in mind, as opposed to, if someone just came to you for personal growth, it's like, oh, let's see what happens. But things have to get done at the end of the day if you're in class or in that university setting.
Do you find that students often come to you with personal issues or personal growth issues or maybe personal life issues?
Yeah, I do. I find, especially as they get more into the clinical classes, those tend to come up and they tend to bring those things up. But it's hard to disentangle from worrying about counseling, and whether it's the DSM and like, is that me, or testing and, okay, well, how could I use this, or how can I understand people in my life better? To how do I have conversations with people? I think that the personal comes up, and they want to know because as the professor, you're sort of viewed as the expert, at least to some degree.
You've spoken about this a bit, but how do you facilitate an environment in which students feel safe to explore personal wellness?
Obviously I've talked about this a bit, but I think one of the key things I try to focus on is process over product and authenticity over perfection. I talk a lot about how even if you had like an pre-prac, we have the tapes they have to do, and they're like, well, it wasn't perfect. I'm like, well, I wouldn't like a perfect tape. I would be annoyed by it. I really want to see who the real you is. I also, I try to be very encouraging and try to balance my feedback, and I think about how much feedback about this can I actually take. So how much constructive versus how much of the quote-unquote good things I see can they handle in that balance.
So that warrants some discernment from you to know how much to give or not to give.
Yeah, absolutely. And then sometimes it's just using that group process to be, like with the class I might say, do you see where you are as compared to the beginning of the semester? How do you feel about that when you think about where you're at? And so just helping them reflect on, okay, it didn't feel like I was making a lot of changes, but I really have done a lot this semester.
Putting it back on them to see that transformation.
Absolutely. One thing I talk about them a lot is you need to learn to evaluate yourself, because there's going to come a point where you finally get that license and you don't ever have to talk to the supervisor again. So you need to be able to say, am I proud of the work I'm doing, or was that do some really crappy work right there? So
helping them identify that as you say that, so that you can reflect on that part. How would you describe the emphasis placed upon students' personal awareness in counselor education and or supervision within your educational institution?
I think because our institution, our unit, is so full of clinicians. Because as I'm sure you've seen, there are a lot of universities where there are people who are practicing clinicians, and then there are people who are not. Yes. And so I think that has brought a really, I think it's just a foregone conclusion that this is really important. I also think because theoretically, all of us tend to lean towards the more humanistic bent, that really makes it, again, a foregone conclusion. That's really important that students do have personal awareness. I think the one thing that is a challenge is then evaluating that and bringing that into. It's easy to say you can't do this, so you can't go forward, but to say you lack personal awareness or the ability, that becomes a more difficult thing to bring into how we evaluate people and decide.
About that part. Yes.
Well, I think this also speaks to the larger university setting. I think gatekeeping with personal awareness can be really difficult, and it can be really difficult to explain to people who aren't clinicians. So when you're having to justify or even fight for, I really think this person needs to redo this class, or I think we need to ask this person to sit out a semester, it can be hard when you're saying, like, they stop having personal awareness. Well, if you're talking to someone that's like biology professor, they really okay. So what does that mean?
Seriously.
Yeah.
I understand it.
Yeah. So I think that can sometimes be a challenge, and then it's just this very ethereal process and property. It's like how it's not like it's an easy thing you can do on a Likert scale. Oh, they have a 3 on personal awareness out of 4. It's sort of hard to judge.
Very abstract.
Yes.
Hard to state exactly what that means.
Yeah, it's sort of like something I can't quite put my finger on, but something's going on there. And again, it's because we do have to maintain that separation, and we can't be their counselor when we can't always figure out exactly what's going on.
Twofold question. What are the implications of developing personal awareness for counselors? Describe the process you have undergone and are utilizing to facilitate your own personal awareness.
I think one of the implications is it's not always happy, quote unquote, positive change. sometimes when you develop awareness, you realize the people you're walking your path with, or the things that are part of your daily life, aren't effective or aren't working anymore. So certainly it's possible to realize as you are becoming a counselor, like, oh, this marriage is broken and it's not going to get better, or these relationships aren't working anymore, or I'm not sure what I think about my family or my faith or any of those things. So I think that can be both positive and negative. It means leaving something behind but moving towards something. I think something that's really important, and the program I went to required this. We don't require it because some institutional legal issues, but we were required to have counseling before we passed our first class when I did my training, and I felt like that was really important. And I tell my students that if you don't go to counseling but you want to be a counselor, you're like a used car salesman that rides a bike to work. If you really believed in your product, you'd be using it. So I think that's important. I think, also just having those health pieces, that social network. I talk about in my pre-prep class, I found an article about the different typologies of burnout. And so I talk about the different typologies and what they're low in, what they're high in. And so just having some actual knowledge. And I also bring in some human development pieces like the hedonic treadmill and how we think external things will somehow improve our situation. But generally, the more you have, getting more doesn't really help as much. So there's some educational pieces, but I think also just meeting with students individually, using those counseling skills and pointing out, do you see what you did there? So with every clinical class, I meet with students. And so next week I'm meeting with like 18 students.
End of semester meetings.
Yes, end of the semester, I'm sort of like, here's where I see you, and what I always try to start with is, what was your experience this semester like, and having them reflect on that. And sometimes it feels like I'm beating a dead horse, but it's always, what do you learn? What did this sort of turning in on yourself and seeing what's really going on. And some students get it, and some students are like, I've answered this question a million times, but when there's no one to ask you that question, and you have to both ask and answer the question, is really important.
Deriving meaning from their experiences.
Absolutely.
What stands out for them.
Yes, I think becoming an evaluator of your own experiences is really just an important part of being a human being.
Sure. And so would you say that, I guess, what is the process that you have undergone, which I assume is probably some of the things you describe for your students, to facilitate your own personal learning?
Counseling has definitely been one. I find it periodic, and also something that's been powerful is going to different kinds of counselors. So I find that when it comes to learning and personal awareness, seeing how different people do things can be really powerful. I also think balance is something that's really important. I think about when you look at a lot of the cultural identity models, really the end stage is that you've integrated your identity, you're aware of other issues, but it's one facet of your personality. I think as a counselor educator, as a counseling student, it's really easy to just feel like this eclipses everything else. So knowing that physical identity, cultural identity, social identity, all these different things have to be attended to is important. So that's something I've had to work through, is like, how do you attend to life outside of work? Because you have to be a human being who counsels. You can't just be counselor 24/7, or else you're gonna go insane.
Yes. Which breathes life into the balance piece.
Yes.
This is the last question. To what extent has your own counselor education contributed to an increased level of personal awareness for you?
I would say that it's really developed my personal awareness. One, it helped because you are part showman, whenever you're a counselor educator. I think it's allowed me to be aware of those different aspects of myself that I might not have been aware of. Because definitely I identify more as an introvert, and so I've had to develop those sides and realize, like, it's not that they were missing, it's just I didn't know they were there, and I hadn't used them. I also find that it helps me see different perspectives as I'm able to see, like, I've been there, I'm not there now, but I'm able to see, all these different sides of the problem. And, really it's, sort of the classic trope, but my students do teach me a lot. They do share things I never would have thought about. And I think, lastly, it really contributes to your understanding of possibilities. I think both as a counselor and counselor educator, it's easy to get stuck in, oh, I've seen this a million times. I know how this is going to play out. And I tell students, I also tell myself, that it's important to allow the people in your life to surprise you. I think that's really contributed to my personal development. That as much as I may think I know how the book ends, there's a chance to be surprised and a chance to be delighted by what students and what I can do in a given situation.
So it sounds like even your own education has facilitated some of this awareness.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there anything in particular that stood out to you in your own training that may have impacted you, or maybe many things?
I would say what's really coming to mind is for my doctoral work. We had our second year, we had an internship. It was a year-long internship. Everyone had to do a campus clinic. It was our cohort, and we had 2-hour meetings every Thursday morning. And it was part group process, part case conceptualization. But I think just getting to hear your voice in a group setting and realize you have things to contribute, and also sort of holding this balance of there are these differing opinions or different perspectives. This is my perspective, but it can exist in this room with these perspectives. I found that to be really important for my personal growth. And sort of then you have to figure out, okay, sort of about Perry's moral development, the idea that, okay, there are all these great ideas, but I have to finally commit to my own. So that's what stands out for me the most in my training in terms of personal development.
Seems like being really validated allowed you to create a sort of personal identity
Yeah,
and professional identity.
absolutely.
That's all the questions. But I'm wondering, is there anything that you want to add about personal awareness, or any questions you may have?
I'm thinking if there's anything I haven't. I think the last thing I would add is, I think the personal development piece is unexpected for some students. I think, and I know I felt this way at the beginning. I was like, okay, someone's going to sit down and they're going to tell me how to deal with every issue. So I'll just remember that and it'll be great. And I think students are, one, surprised that that's such a big piece. Like, maybe cognitively they know, but they don't know what they're in for. But also surprised in how much they can develop. And especially since it's such a short, 2.5 years. So I think that's both interesting but also exciting for students.
I'm hearing surprises as a lot of value in
Yeah.
education, even personal and relationships and perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I think novelty is important. I had a professor that said, if your language becomes boring, your thoughts do too. So you always have to keep things sort of novel and changing things up, so that just as your language is, so your thoughts are.
Well said. Still reading.
But I think that's all I have.
Thank you for your time.
Absolutely.
And interest in helping me with this study.
Absolutely. Pleasure.